Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Gini Dietrich.
Ginny, I've got some expectations that I need to clue you in on.
Great.
Right after this.
I answered that very happily, but now I'm scared of your expectations.
Well, no, I'm addressing your expectations, really.
Oh, my expectations.
Because, I know that you had expected that we would have 1 million listeners by the time we hit the 5-year mark. And I guess I might have forgotten to tell you back then that I didn't think that was a reasonable expectation.
Shoot.
And so we're not quite at 1 million.
Not quite there.
No. Not quite there.
No, we're not quite there. That's all right. I understand. I don't think I'm as understanding as some clients might be, but I understand.
Well, you had mentioned that you wanted those numbers, but and I just wanted you to be my co-host so badly that I just couldn't tell you the truth that was not a realistic expectation. I figured we'd deal with it when we got to that time.
And here we are, and we don't have 1 million. Shoot. Well,
we don't.
Bummer.
But
I guess
this
I'll have to find
is
a
a
new co-host. Make sure you tell them the next 5 years not going to get to 1 million.
Well, then why would I do that? I mean,
I feel like you've learned your lesson. It's a lesson you should learn.
I mean, maybe, but and I wouldn't be like a lot of agencies.
Fair.
Which is how we got here, because agencies sadly often do not set accurate expectations with prospects before they become clients, or even clients when they're talking about some new initiative or new plan that they want to implement, because we don't want to be the bad guy that's telling them, getting into the Wall Street Journal next week is probably not going to happen, right? Because we want them to sign on the dotted line. We want them to hire us. We figure we can sort all that stuff out. They will like working with us so much that we'll be able to get past that.
Last week, so we're recording this in October. I had someone from my team come to me and say, so client A wants to launch their new product the day after Thanksgiving, to which I laughed out loud. And I said, and what did you say? And he said, I wasn't sure what to say, so I didn't say anything. And I was like, no, you have to tell them we can't launch something the day after Thanksgiving. Like, nobody will care. If we're not going to launch it before Thanksgiving, we need to wait until January. And so I had to give him the pep talk to go back and say to the client, this is not smart. You really shouldn't do this, because that is not an accurate expectation that you're going to launch a new product and have all sorts of fun things happen for you the day after Thanksgiving.
And this is a U.S.-based business.
It is.
Because I've certainly seen foreign businesses sometimes, not realize, this is a day.
Didn't realize.
I haven't in other countries as well. And so you're like, no, I guess we probably don't want to roll this out on Maltese Independence Day or whatever,
Sure. Yeah.
Which is a real thing, by the way, just so everybody knows. Because it's one I've stumbled across in the past when I wanted to get something done with some colleagues in Malta. Anyway, so, yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say. I mean, I guess, if it was something where, it helped them to break through the lines at Walmart to get in, then maybe that's an okay day to launch. But if it has nothing to do with cutting the line, knocking other people over to get that, magic toy for your kid, then
no. The reason was we don't want our team to have to work over the holidays. And I was like, wait.
Wait, what?
That was the reason. I was like, so let's
the team then have to work the day after Thanksgiving, which most businesses give off,
and also the week leading up to, including the day of Thanksgiving,
right?
Everything, because usually when you launch something big, you're working the day before.
Yeah. Because I can tell you that years ago I did do a campaign that was targeted at Black Friday, and that was not fun for me or the rest of the team, because we did have calls on Thanksgiving, and
sure,
we had stuff we had to do, but it made sense because it was a Black Friday themed message that we were putting out, and so
actually kind of had to do it. Friday.
You kind of had to do it that day, right?
Yeah.
So it made sense in that context, but I certainly wouldn't go out of my way to target that day. But in any case, that's a great example, because it's the kind of thing where you do have to sometimes hear clients say things that you're like, want to do what? You think this is possible? You need to be the adult in the room who is happy to go to them and say, look, this is not a reasonable expectation. Here's what we can do.
Right.
But too often, either with prospects because we want to get them to sign, or clients because we don't want conflict, we don't push back in a timely fashion to let them know. And so we often allow their unrealistic expectations to linger.
Yeah, I mean that's it's a perfect example, and that's the conversation I had with my team, which was, listen, we can't let this linger. This, you have to go back immediately and say, we don't think this is going to work, and here's why. Here is our recommendation, and they did. I mean, to your point, a lot of times we want to avoid conflict, and they definitely wanted to avoid the conflict, but I said it's going to be much worse in the long run if we don't attack this now and say, expectation wise, your expectation is wonky, not in those words, but your expectation is wonky. Here's what we recommend instead. And I really said, like, we need to, you need to wait until middle of January before we even think about launching this, because you're not going to get anything between Christmas and New Year's, or I mean, Thanksgiving and New Year, Thanksgiving and Christmas. Jeez Louise. I'm getting all my holidays mixed up. Whew, that was rough.
Last week or the week before, you mixed up your transcription services and
I
ended up
mean,
and created a
geez,
brand
yeah.
new one. And I don't know. My expectations of you are going way down. Anyway, I think that we need to spend more time remembering that we want to talk about ourselves as strategic advisors to clients. We want to elevate how we appear and how we think about ourselves. And we talk about, we need to price like we're actually giving advice, not like we're just, worker bees. All of that's great, but then you actually need to step up to the plate.
That's right.
And when it is time, you need to have those difficult conversations. And I think it really does start during the sales process, during the business development process, because this is where I think you often end up with the largest gap in expectations. Because first of all, as we've talked about repeatedly here, we're often presenting a proposal to a client for a solution based on extraordinarily little information. And so we're all sitting in the room around the table. We're on the Zoom with all sorts of happy talk about all the great things we've done for other people, all of the great things that they would like to see happen. And we never really have a true meeting of the minds of, this is what the expectation is on the client side, and here's how we're actually going to get there on our side. And so if you allow the ambiguity to exist, yes, you may get the signature on the contract, but you're setting yourself up for failure somewhere down the road, 3, 6, 9, 12 months down the road, when the client realizes, you didn't do those things I thought you were going to do. And maybe you did such a great job in building the relationship that they accept that. But maybe they don't. Maybe
Right.
they come back to that and they say, I thought you were going to get me in the Wall Street Journal. I thought we were going to be able to do this launch by this date. I thought we were going to have this many viewers on our website. If those things are still in their mind because you didn't correct them up front, you are now setting yourself up for not just a client who is not likely to renew or continue the relationship, but they're likely to be unhappy. And unhappy clients often tell other people that they're unhappy. So yes, you won some short-term revenue, but you've really shot yourself in the foot for the long term.
Yes. And I would also add that, you may not have asked the question, and the client may not have given you their expectations because the question wasn't asked. And in their head, they're like, oh yeah, well, I expect, just based on my knowledge of how these types of agencies work, they're going to do this, this, and this. And there was no conversation about expectations. So you're going along the assumption that you're doing things the way that you do, and the client's going along on the assumption that things are done the way that either they've had in the past, or they have some notion in their head of how it works, and there's no meeting of the minds from that perspective too. So when you're in your new business meetings, one of the questions you have to ask is, what are your expectations of us? What does success look like? Where would you like to be a year from now? How does that look? What types of things do you consider results? Those are the kinds of questions you should be asking every single time, so that you can understand where their expectations are maybe unrealistic, and you can set those straight for them.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and I think, what does success look like? That's one of my favorite questions, right? The way I usually pose it is, a year from now, how will we know we've been successful?
Yep.
And so that often will surface any unrealistic expectations. It's still not fully enough, right? Because sometimes you may be in agreement on the actual goal, but what it takes to get there there may not still be the meeting of the mind. So I think part of our job on the agency side is to set the expectations of what the start of the relationship looks like, what the engagement from the client looks like, because a lot of times clients may think, oh, you're just going to do all the heavy lifting and we don't have to worry about it. But we all know
Right.
that agencies cannot be successful without a lot of help
Yep.
from our clients.
Yep.
And we cannot allow them to think that, yes, we will take all of the burden off on you, right? There is going to be a burden on them, whether that's reviewing things or providing you information or providing interviews so that we can write things off of it or whatever. There is a requirement for not just active feedback, but timely and active feedback. And if we're not setting those expectations from the get go, that may be a pain point down the road as well. So it's not just the ultimate goals. That's where you should start. But you need to make clear that they understand what it's going to look like in the lead up to getting those results.
Yeah, and I think you're exactly right when you said at the start that sometimes we want the signature so badly and the new client so badly that we're not totally honest about how long it takes. Like from a PR perspective, a communications perspective, it takes some time. 3 or 6 months is easily, depending on what you're doing, how long it will take before you see any results. And we're fearful that the prospect will say, oh, well, I don't have time to wait for that, or I want to launch something the day after Thanksgiving. And we tend to not say, well, that's not realistic, and here's what is realistic. Or we tend to think, well, gosh, prospects are going to be freaked out that it's going to take us 6 months to get results, so they don't know what they're paying for those first 6 months, so let's just not mention it. That happens.
Right. It happens a lot. And I've had agency owners say to me, well, why would I want to draw their attention to things they may not like?
Because it's going to take that long.
Right. It's because it's what's about to happen.
Right.
I mean, it's why the doctor says this may sting a little, right? Instead of just, oh, let's see what happens, right? Because if you know it's going to sting, you can prepare yourself for it.
Right.
If you don't know it's going to sting, then you're really shocked and surprised and really angry probably when it actually does. So you need to be clear with your clients and your prospects about when it's going to sting. And you need to help them to understand, here's what the first 3 months look like. And it's going to look, in many cases, really boring to the client.
Yep.
So you do need to find some ways to work in some, I don't want to say fun, but more noticeable deliverables into those early stages.
Yep.
And it's one of the reasons why the peso model is so effective for agencies, because you can turn out blog posts far sooner than you can get an earned media piece placed or get a journalist interested in your story. Right. So there's many more opportunities. And so it's one of the reasons why agencies should be looking at particularly the owned content piece, because it's a way that you can at least start showing movement and motion and progress of a sort, even before you get into the big stuff that the client is really looking for. But you need to let them know this is what it's going to look like. There's going to be a lot of agreeing on messaging. There's going to be a lot of brainstorming sessions. There's going to be a lot of, back and forth with your team to make sure we have language just right. And if you don't set that expectation from the start, then they're going to get frustrated when 3-4 weeks in, they're like, why are we still just talking about talking points? Why can't we just be out here talking? Why haven't you set up any interviews yet? Why aren't you putting out press releases? Because we're not on the same page yet. It takes time for us to get up to speed, and that's part of the process.
Yeah, and you raise a really good point that the peso model works really well for this kind of stuff, because with one client that we started with just about a year ago, one of the very first things we did was launch a podcast, and it was ugly to start. A year later the content's gotten more sophisticated, the guests have gotten more sophisticated, like all of those things. But the fact that we started it, and I think we started it on the third week of working with them, and so they saw progress immediately. But like I said, it was ugly, but they still saw progress, and they still saw that we were doing something, and they were participating because one of the executives is the host of it. So they felt like there was progress being made as we worked on the other stuff that was more longer term.
Right. And that's why it's important when you're putting together a proposal, a strategy, plan, whatever you want to call it, for a prospect, that you mix in these things where there's short-term wins and long-term wins, right? It's if it's everything into the long term, then it will take too long to see anything, and that will cause frustration. If you only focus on the short term, you'll get a lot of little wins, but ultimately clients like to hit home runs too. And so, you need to, at least look like you're trying to hit the home runs, and you're not just sitting there, being happy with, a walk every time at bat.
Yeah. And I would say
baseball
too,
analogy here. So we hit the postseason.
hit the postseason. The Cubs did not make it.
I don't want to talk
thought they
about
were
Red
going
Sox,
to.
so.
Thought they were going to. Yeah, the Red Sox are not. Short terms. I forgot what I was going to say. Anyway, yeah.
Got to mix the short and the long term. That was my point.
You have to mix them both. And it's a lot easier to say, listen, this is our process. This is what you can expect, and this is how long it will take us. So like when we do our process, of course we use the PESO model, but we also add in lead nurturing in there. And so with this client I mentioned, we didn't start a lead nurturing program until about 5 weeks ago. And that's because we had to create all of the stuff to go with it, right? We needed case studies, we needed testimonials, we needed content and really juicy content. We needed a survey. We needed all of this stuff that would allow us to do lead nurturing really well and really effectively. And so we couldn't start it so it's almost a year in before we even started that. But we've had all these smaller wins along the way that now allow us to go to launch into, in its second year, a lead nurturing program that's going to start to generate leads.
And look, if the prospect doesn't like your process, it's better to find that out before they sign than after.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? Yes. Yes.
So you don't want to share this in week one and here's the calendar and they say no, this is not good. We need to change this. Share it before they sign.
Yes.
So that you can have that healthy discussion then. And if you're not able to convince them that your way is the right way, or you're not able to find some modified version that you can still, adopt and feel like you can succeed with, then it's better to walk away. It's better not to walk into something where it's doomed to failure from day one. That just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And so you need to really get good at setting those expectations and describing the process that it's going to take to get there, because that helps people understand if it's worthwhile, and I think that, if we look at a lot of things in our lives, that it's the same way, right? I mean, if I say, okay, I'd like to go run a marathon, sounds good. It's going to take, 6 to 9 months of very detailed training, right? And I've run half marathons, and even that takes training. I never did a full marathon because it was more training than I was willing to accomplish. But if someone said, oh, sure, it's easy. I mean, because people will tell you, you've done a half marathon, a full marathon's really no different. I mean, on the one hand, they are correct because it's not like I'm running for time. I just have to run to get across the finish line, but it's still a lot more mileage that you have to put in on very consistent basis in order to be able to do, the full 26 miles. So, you need to look at the process and make sure that you are comfortable and that the client is comfortable with it, because otherwise you'll feel just the same way that you would have if you had signed up for the Boston Marathon, showed up and, without running a mile and crap, and you're like forget Heartbreak Hill. I'm not even getting
across the finish line. Maybe. Yeah, I mean, it's a great analogy, and I think the reason that it's used so often is because it does illustrate that you can't go out and run 26.2 miles without training for it. The same thing, you have to have a specific training program. And I don't run, but I cycle, and the same thing, I have to have a really specific training schedule to help me reach my goals. And I use that analogy when I talk to clients, depending on especially if they're athletes as well, then it's a really easy analogy to say, okay, well, you're going to train for your 5K and this is how we're going to get you there. And then you're going to train for your 10K and this is what we're going to do to get you there. And it's a great analogy to use for those who understand, the training piece of being an endurance athlete. So I think you're right. You just have to, it's a lot better to learn about it up front if they're not okay with it, because 3 or 6 or 9 months down the road, you're going to be frustrated. They're going to be frustrated. You're going to end up breaking ties anyway. And it's probably going to cost you more money than you made in the long run. And they're going to tell people you suck.
Yeah. And you have to be careful that you don't look at your past track record and say, well, I've never done this before, so it's all fine. Because that's another thing I hear. Well, I've run a successful agency. That's not how we've done it. We really haven't had bad experiences. First of all, I think you're probably not remembering the bad experiences,
right? Because you blocked them out.
I would be truly shocked if we, went client by client over the course of the 10 years or whatever you had your agency and didn't find. I mean, even ones where you probably did set good expectations, they may still, have felt you didn't, right? So,
sure.
And I think that you can't delude yourself into thinking that just because you've been able to do it before means that it's a good practice.
Right.
And not to continue to destroy the running analogy, but about 10 years ago, I ran my last half marathon. I ran it on 72 hours notice. So now, in fairness, I'd planned to run 10 miles that day anyway. So in my
All
mind,
right.
I was going to run 10 miles anyway.
Yep, yep,
So
it's a
I'm
training run.
just running an extra 3. But there's a big difference between a 10-mile easy training run and a 13 because I'm a competitive guy, even though I'm slow as dirt, and much slower today, obviously. But back then I was still slow as dirt. And so I ran out and I ran my best time ever in a half marathon. Really, really dumb to do when you weren't actually training to do it, because that was the last half marathon I ever ran, because I totally
Oh,
trashed my legs
man.
and they've
Yeah,
never been able to do double digit runs again, because I pushed myself way too hard. And so then everything started hurting and
of course.
downhill
Yeah,
from there.
yeah. So
And I got
it's a
old too.
good.
So that
Well,
complicated.
yeah, there's that, but it's a good lesson though. It's a
Hopefully
good
older
lesson.
means wiser in the agency world. It may not in running, right? But it does in the
It
agency world. And
does.
that's what we talk about here on the Agency Leadership Podcast. But I think now that
Experiencing
we're
something.
really on the verge of just going completely off the rails here, flying over the handlebars of the bicycle or whatever, it's time to draw this episode to a close. I'm Chip Griffin,
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
and it depends.